She kept it on, and the next morning, his side of the penthouse had a second coffee cup on the counter. Not the guest room, not the careful geography of separate spaces they had maintained for 31 days. His side, the kitchen he inhabited every morning before 5, the counter where he stood and read his phone and existed in that particular silence of a man who needs no one to witness him. A second cup, placed there by someone, by him. She didn't mention it. Neither did he. But it was there the morning after that as well, and the one after that. This was how things changed in Seung Hoon's world. Not announcements, not declarations. Objects moved, spaces rearranged, a fact quietly installed where no fact had existed before, offered without comment, and received without ceremony. She was learning the language. Now, what she was not prepared for was the phone call that came on the 4th morning of this new arrangement, before 6, while she was standing at the window with her second cup, watching the city begin its slow gray opening. Seung Hoon's voice carried from the study. Not the words, the walls were too well built for that, but the register. She had learned his registers the way sailors learn weather, and this one was something she hadn't heard before, controlled. But underneath it, something tectonic. He came out 11 minutes later. He was already dressed. He stood in the center of the main room and looked at her with an expression that had been very recently and deliberately assembled. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. In 31 days, he had never begun a sentence that way. He told her at the kitchen counter, standing, not sitting. She noticed this, filed it under the growing index of what his body communicated when his face would not. The red dragons, he said, were not finished. This was not news to her. She had not imagined that one night at the docks constituted a conclusion. But what he told her next reorganized the landscape of the past month in a way that made the floor feel suddenly approximate. The man she had seen at the warehouse, the Red Dragon boss, the one who had arranged to trade her for Vincent's debts, his name was Park Junho. He was not, Seung Hoon said, simply a rival. He was a former partner, someone who had operated within the Seung network for 9 years before a fracture 3 years ago had sent him to build his own structure on the other side of the wall. "He knew you before you knew me," Seung Hoon said. "He was in the room when my team identified you as a candidate. He was still inside at that point." Mirabel set her cup down. "He was inside your organization." He was, for approximately 4 months after the fracture, during which we didn't know he had already begun building the Red Dragons. He had access to our intelligence processes during that period, including the candidate assessments. She looked at him. "So when your team flagged me, Park Junho saw it. And Vincent. Vincent's debts were not incidental. They were cultivated. Pa used 3 years to build a financial dependency in your fiancé. He chose Vincent specifically because of his proximity to you." Seung Hoon's jaw was doing the thing. The wedding wasn't interrupted because Vincent owed money. The wedding was the mechanism. Like the chaos of your public abandonment was designed to create an opening. An opening for what? For whoever arrived to fill it. The silence that followed was not the comfortable kind they had been building. It was the kind that comes when a sentence finishes and leaves a shape in the air that takes a moment to fully see. "He expected you to come," she said. "He knew your team had flagged me. He knew you would respond to the message. He wanted you to marry me. He wanted to know who I would marry, what she looked like, where she would be, what leverage she would represent." Mirabel's hand found the counter's edge. "I was bait. You were a variable he introduced into my life. What he intended to do with that variable." Seung Hoon stopped, a half second which from him was the equivalent of a full stop. "I is what I'm currently working to determine." She stood very still. The city outside was fully awake now, indifferent and bright. moving through its ordinary Tuesday with no knowledge of what was being said in this kitchen 43 floors above it. "How long have you known this?" she said. "The full picture." 3 days. 3 days. She counted backward. The first morning of the second coffee cup, the night he had stood in the doorway of the main room and taken her hand differently. "You knew," she said quietly, "when I burned the contract." He didn't answer, which was its own answer. She looked at him. Really looked. The way she had not allowed herself to look before. Fully. Was with everything she had learned in 31 days applied at once. And she understood that she was looking at a man who had told her something true and withheld something adjacent to it, and that the distance between those two things was precisely the size of her choice to stay. "Did you let me burn it?" she said, "because you wanted me to stay, or because a willing wife is harder to use as leverage than a contractual one?" The question landed. She watched it land, watched him take it without flinching, without deflecting, which was, she was beginning to understand, his version of an answer. "Both things can be true," he said. "Yes," she said, "they can." She picked up her coffee and walked to the window and stood with her back to him and drank it. She heard him, after a moment, move toward the door. "Mirabel." She didn't turn. "The reasons something begins," he said, "are not always the reasons it continues." She heard the door close. She kept looking at the city. Her hand on the cup was steady, and she hated slightly that it was. She started carrying the phone he'd given her everywhere, not because he asked her to, because she had made a decision in front of that window with the dregs of her coffee that she was not going to be a variable anymore. Variables were acted upon. Variables didn't understand the equation they existed inside. She had spent 31 days learning the grammar of this world, and whatever Park Joon-ho had intended when he introduced her into Seung Hoon's life, he had made one significant miscalculation. He had given her time to learn. The first thing she did was go to the study. And she had been in it before, briefly, always invited. This time she let herself in. The room was organized with the same deliberate precision as the man who inhabited it. Documents in labeled files, nothing decorative that wasn't also functional, a desk clear enough to think on. She sat in his chair, which felt strange, and then didn't, and she pulled up the contact in her phone listed as security and called it. A man answered on the first ring. "Mrs. Seung." "I need everything you have on Park Joon-ho," she said. "Not the summary, the full file." A pause of exactly the right length, long enough to register surprise, short enough to remain professional. Mr. Seung Hoon would need to authorize. "Then tell him I asked, and tell him I'll be in the study when he's ready to discuss it." She ended the call and waited. Now he came in 14 minutes later. He stood in the doorway of his own study and looked at her in his chair with an expression she had never seen on him before. It wasn't displeasure. It wasn't surprise, exactly. It was something that lived between those two things and had a third quality underneath that she would spend the rest of the day trying to name. "You called security," he said. "I want the Park Joon-ho file." "You're not trained to—" "I read your room at the restaurant on day 9 and identified Choi before you confirmed it. I'm not asking to run the operation. I'm asking to understand what I'm standing in the middle of." She held his gaze. "I'm not a variable, Seung Hoon. Don't manage me like one." The study was quiet. The city was a murmur 43 floors below. He crossed to the desk. He reached past her, close enough that she could have counted the seconds of proximity, and opened the lower drawer on the left side, removed a folder, set it on the desk in front of her. "When you're finished," he said, "tell me what you think." He left her alone with it. Park Joon-ho was 51 years old and had been building towards something for longer than the Red Dragons existed. The file told her this in the accumulated language of intelligence reports, movements, associates, financial flows, photographs of meetings in restaurants and warehouses and private terminals. She read it the way Seung Hoon had taught her to read rooms, looking not for what was present, but for what was conspicuously absent. What was absent in 9 years of documented activity was patience. Park Joon-ho moved fast. He built fast, struck fast, absorbed losses, and rebuilt without apparent grief for what was gone. The fracture with the Seung family was documented in dry operational language, but between the lines, she could read the shape of it. A man who had decided that 9 years of working beneath someone else's name was 9 years too many. A man who had left not in anger but in calculation, taking 3 months of intelligence with him like severance he had awarded himself, and then 3 years of building, of waiting, of planting Vincent's gambling debts like seeds in careful soil. She closed the folder on the last page and sat for a moment in the quality of silence that follows a thing understood. Park Joon-ho had not miscalculated. That was the problem. He had introduced her into Seung Hoon's life deliberately, knowing the parameters, knowing that Seung Hoon would marry her, knowing she would eventually become something more than contractual, knowing that a chosen wife was not a liability but an anchor, something that could be used not to extract Seung Hoon but to hold him, to split his attention, to put something in his life that bled if you cut it. She was not bait for a trap that had already been sprung. She was bait for one that hadn't been yet. She opened the door to find Seung Hoon in the main room, on a call, standing at the window in the late afternoon light. He saw her face when he turned and ended the call without explanation to whoever was on the other end. "He's not finished," she said. "The warehouse wasn't the objective. It was a test. He wanted to see how you'd respond when I was threatened. He's mapping you." Seung Hoon looked at her steadily. "He knows," she continued, "that you'll move the entire city for me now. That's not a weakness he's going to attack. It's a mechanism he's going to use." "Yes," Seung Hoon said. "You've known this." "I've suspected it." "Then why?" She stopped, rearranged. "What is he waiting for?" "An event." Seung Hoon set his phone on the side table. "In 11 days, there's a summit. The 5 major networks in this region convening to address territorial agreements that have been deteriorating for 2 years. I chair it. It requires my physical presence in a location that will be known in advance to all 5 networks, including Park Joon-ho. He has a seat at the table, which I have not revoked, because revoking it tells him what I know." She stood in the center of the room and felt the architecture of it settle over her like a structure she was now inside rather than observing. "He'll move at the summit," she said, "or just before it, when my attention is divided and my presence is fixed." "And me?" He looked at her. The late light came through the window behind him and made the room amber and strange. "You're the variable he thinks he controls," Seung Hoon said. "I would like you to be the one he doesn't." She felt something shift in her chest. Not fear or not only fear. Something that had more edges than fear. Something with the quality of a decision being made at a level below language. "Tell me what you need," she said. The next 11 days were the most precise of her life. She attended 2 events with Seung Hoon in that period, both deliberately public, both calibrated to communicate a specific image, the chosen wife, settled and visible, the kind of presence that confirmed what Park Joon-ho believed he had orchestrated. She wore what was chosen for her for these appearances and understood that her clothing was a communication, that her posture was a communication, that every visible dimension of her existence in this period was a message being sent through her to someone watching. She did not find this as unsettling as she expected to. What she found unsettling was the private margin of those days, the space between the strategy and the silence of the apartment, the second coffee cup that was still there every morning, the way Seung Hoon, 3 nights before the summit, I came and sat across from her in the main room without a phone or a document or any stated purpose, and simply sat, the way people sit when they are in the presence of something they can't organize and have stopped trying to. If something happens at the summit, he said, there are protocols. You know them. I know them. There's a car, a destination, people who will move you regardless of what you say. I know. Mirabel. She looked up. I made a calculation when I came to that church, he said. I have made calculations every day since. I want you to know that the current calculation... He stopped. Something crossed his face that had no controlled version. Is no longer purely strategic. She held very still. Is that hard to say? Yes. Good, she said. It should be. He looked at her for a moment with something unguarded in his expression, and she thought that this precise, undefended moment was the most dangerous thing she had seen in 38 days. More dangerous than the warehouse. More dangerous than Park Joon-ho's file. A man like Seung Hoon, unguarded, was either a gift or a catastrophe, and she was no longer certain she could tell the difference. Go to sleep, she said quietly. You have 11 more hours before it begins. He stood. At the door, he paused without turning. Stay on this floor tomorrow, he said, until I call. Seung Hoon. Yes. Come back, she said. Not a plea. A directive. Given in his own register, returned to him. He left. The summit was in a building she had never been to, in the financial district's quieter edge, the kind of building that hosted things that required discretion rather than display. She knew this from the file. She knew the room layout, the attendees, the seating arrangements that communicated hierarchy in the language of organized crime. She knew where Park Joon-ho would sit. She stayed on the 43rd floor, and she waited. The security team checked in every 30 minutes. Seung Hoon's lieutenant, a man named Dae who had the energy of someone powered by a motor he never switched off, called at 9, at 10, at 11, each time with a brief status that told her the summit was proceeding without incident. At 11:47, he didn't call. At 11:52, she called him. No answer. She sat with the silent phone in her hands for 60 seconds that felt geological. And then she called the number labeled security. The man who answered was not the one who usually answered. Mrs. Seung, said a voice she didn't recognize. Please don't be alarmed. Every carefully constructed steadiness in her body went to glass. Where is he? She said. Mr. Seung Hoon is... There has been an incident. He is being... Where is he? Mrs. Seung, we need you to remain in the apartment. A team is on its way to... She ended the call, stood up, went to the room on the north side of the floor, the door that was always closed, the room she had identified weeks ago and not entered. She tried the handle, locked. She stood looking at it for 3 seconds, and then went to the study and opened the lower left drawer, where the Park Joon-ho file had been, and looked at what else was in it. The key was there. Then she had noticed it on the day she'd read the file and filed it the way she filed everything. Quietly, precisely, for later. Later was now. The room on the north side was not a room she had a category for. Smaller than the study. A single desk, 3 monitors, dark. A wall of photographs and documents connected by the kind of thread that communicated obsession with the clinical language of surveillance. She stood in the doorway and let her eyes move across it, and understood in the space of 10 seconds that this room predated her, that whatever was on this wall had been here for longer than 38 days. She stepped closer. The photographs were familiar and not. Park Joon-ho, yes. She recognized him from the file. The Red Dragon's network mapped and annotated, but there were other photographs. Other connections. The threads running to faces she didn't recognize, and then she stopped. One face she did recognize. It took a moment because the photograph was angled, partially obscured, taken at distance. But she had looked at this face across a table in a church, at an altar, in a warehouse. She knew the particular geography of the eyes, the way the jaw sat. Vincent. Not the Vincent of the warehouse. Not the diminished, frightened man she had looked at across a concrete floor and felt the finality of. This photograph was older. By the timestamp in the corner, taken 14 months ago, 14 months before the wedding, before the gambling debts that Park Joon-ho had supposedly cultivated over 3 years. Vincent was sitting across a restaurant table from a man she had never seen. The man's face was circled in red marker. Beneath the circle, Seung Hoon's precise handwriting, a single notation. Park J, confirmed handler. Duration, unknown. Estimate 4 to 5 years. 4 to 5 years. Not 3 years of cultivated debt. 4 to 5 years of handling. Meaning Vincent had not been recruited by Park Joon-ho after Seung Hoon's intelligence team flagged Mirabel as a candidate. Vincent had been placed in her life before she was ever flagged. She stood in the north room with the photograph in her hand and felt the ground shift beneath the entire architecture of the last 38 days, which meant that Seung Hoon's team had not found her by accident, had not simply run a standard candidate assessment and turned up her name. She had been identified first, and then Vincent had been placed, which meant Park Joon-ho had known about her before Seung Hoon did. Now, which meant the question was not why Park Joon-ho had introduced her into Seung Hoon's life. The question, the real question, the one that made the room tilt slightly on its axis, was how Park Joon-ho had known that Seung Hoon's team would be looking for candidates at all. She set the photograph back on the desk with hands that were trembling for the first time in 38 days. Her phone rang. She answered it. Mrs. Seung. Day's voice, strained but intact. Mr. Seung Hoon is secure. He's asking for you. Are you on the floor? Yes, she said. Her voice was level. She was learning his language in more ways than she had intended. He wants you to stay there. We'll have him back within the hour. D. She looked at the wall, at the threads, at Vincent's face 14 months ago. Yes, Mrs. De Seung? Who, she said carefully, identified me as a candidate. Which member of the team ran that assessment? A pause. Shorter than it should have been, which meant it had been anticipated. I'd have to check the records, Mrs. Seung. Do that, she said. Have the answer ready when he gets back. She ended the call, stood in the north room, looked at the wall that Seung Hoon had built in secret, the wall that contained a truth he had not told her, and she understood that there were 2 possible explanations for why he hadn't. Either he didn't know the full picture yet, or he did. And she was standing in a marriage she had chosen, in a life she had decided was real, and she could not yet determine which of those 2 possibilities she was living inside. The ring on her finger caught the light from the monitors, and it held it, the way it always did, without giving anything back. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she sat down at the desk, turned on the monitors, and started reading from the beginning. The files were organized by date, oldest first, which meant she was reading backward through time, watching a structure assemble itself in reverse, the way you understand a building better by starting with its foundation than its facade. The earliest document was dated 4 years and 3 months ago. Not 3 years, not 14 months, 4 years. She read without moving for a long time. The monitors cast their blue light across her face, and the room stayed quiet, and the city, 43 floors below, continued its indifferent turning, and she read everything. Every assessment, every flagged communication, every thread of the surveillance architecture that Seung Hoon had built inside this room that looked like obsession, but was, she now understood, something more precise. It was a record of knowing. And the candidate assessment that had identified her, the one she had assumed was standard procedure, a search that had found her name by the logic of criteria, was not standard. It had been initiated not by Seung Hoon's team, but in response to incoming intelligence. Someone had sent information about Mirabel to the Seung network, had pointed at her, had said in the language of intelligence reports, "Here, this one." The source was listed with a code she didn't recognize. She wrote it down. The document beneath it was a response memo, internal, addressed to Seung Hoon directly. She read it twice. It confirmed receipt of the intelligence, confirmed the assessment's initiation, and included a line at the bottom that stopped her entirely. *Re source reliability. Handler 7 has been confirmed active within 2 secondary networks. I cross-reference with Red Dragon mapping currently underway. Advise caution, candidate until origin of intelligence is verified. Handler 7. She wrote that down too. She kept reading. Handler 7 appeared in 11 subsequent documents over a period of 8 months. Always in the margins. Always flagged for cross-reference. A source who provided accurate, valuable intelligence to the Seung network over a period of years. Intelligence that proved reliable enough that its origin stopped being questioned. A source so embedded, so consistently accurate, that the machinery of Seung Hoon's operation had learned to trust it the way you trust a compass, without examining how the compass was made. In the 9th document, there was a name. She sat very still and looked at it. Then she heard the elevator, and she did not move from the chair. She heard his footsteps cross the main room, pause at the guest room, move toward the study, then stop outside the north room's open door. She heard the particular quality of silence that meant he was standing in it. "You found the key," he said. "It was in the drawer where you put the file." She turned to look at him. He was in the doorway, jacket gone, collar open, a cut above his left eyebrow that had been cleaned but not dressed. She noted it without asking. "Handler 7, she said. "I need you to tell me who that is." He crossed the room without hurry and stood beside the desk and looked at the monitor she was on. And his expression moved through something she couldn't fully read and came out the other side as the particular composure of a man who's been expecting a conversation and is deciding how to begin it. "Sit down," she said. He sat, in the chair against the wall, the one that faced the desk. She had the strange and not entirely comfortable experience of watching him occupy a subordinate position in his own room. "You knew," she said, "before you came to the church, not just that the inheritance clause required a wife. You knew about me specifically. You knew Vincent had been placed. You knew where the intelligence identifying me had originated." "I knew some of it," he said. "How much?" He looked at her steadily. "I knew the candidate intelligence had come through Handler 7. And I knew Handler 7 had connections I hadn't fully mapped. I did not know, when I came to the church, that Vincent had been placed 4 years ago. I knew there was a connection to the Red Dragon network. I did not know its depth." "But you suspected." "I suspected the identification of you was not clean, yes." She let that sit in the room between them. "You came anyway," she said. "Yes." "Knowing I might be a complication inside a network play." "Yes." "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. The cut above his eyebrow was beginning to color at the edges. She watched him choose his words with the same deliberate economy he applied to everything, and she understood that what he said next would be the most honest thing she had heard from him, and that this made it, paradoxically, the thing she was most afraid of. That because the clause was real, he said, and the candidates who had run were gone, and I read the intelligence about you and I made a calculation. A pause. And then I got in the car, and I want to be precise with you. I got in the car for the clause. I stayed in the marriage for something else, and those are not the same thing. She held his gaze. That is not an answer to my question. I know. Try again. Something moved through his face, the same unguarded quality she had seen 3 nights ago, the thing without a controlled version. Because whatever Park Junho intended when he pointed at you, you were not the thing he thought you were. You read a room on day 9 that my own people missed. You walked into a warehouse rather than away from it. Oh, you sat in this chair." He looked at the desk. "And found what you found, and your hands are steady." He met her eyes. "I don't know how to explain the rest of it in terms that don't sound like calculation, but I can tell you that the calculation stopped feeling like calculation somewhere around day 14, and I didn't know what to do with that, and I still don't." The room was very quiet. "Handler 7, she said. "Who is it?" "Mirabel, tell me." He looked at her for a moment with something that was almost reluctance, from a man she had never seen reluctant. "Your brother," he said, "David." She heard it, processed it, set it down somewhere inside herself with the care of someone handling something whose weight they haven't fully assessed yet. David. Big, steady. Unshakable David, who always answered on the second ring. David, who had walked her through every crisis since she was 9 years old. David, who had not, she now understood, answered on the second ring on the day of the wedding, who had not called back, whose absence she had attributed to timing and had not examined because there were too many other things to examine. "How long?" she said. 3 years of confirmed activity, possibly longer. "He works for Park Joon-ho. He has been providing intelligence to the Red Dragon Network while simultaneously providing intelligence to mine. He is..." Seung Hoon paused. "What the industry calls a double handler. He feeds both sides. He profits from both sides. And he manages the flow of information between them to maximize his own utility. He pointed you at me. He gave my network the intelligence that identified you as a candidate. Yes, and..." Another pause, shorter, more controlled. "He gave Park Joon-ho confirmation that my network had taken the intelligence seriously." She looked at the wall, at the threads, at the place where David's name should have been, would now be, was perhaps already annotated in some document she hadn't reached yet. "He told Park Joon-ho you would come to the church," she said. "Yes. He made sure the wedding happened, the venue, the guest list, the visibility of the event. We believe so. He's been managing both of you." She said it not with heat, but with the flat precision of a thing measured and found to be exactly what it is. "Using me as the mechanism for 3 years. Yes." She stood up. Not in agitation. She crossed to the wall and stood in front of it and looked at the full architecture of what 4 years of patient engineering looked like. The whole shape of it, visible now that she knew where to stand. Park Joon-ho's real objective had never been to destroy Seung Hoon. Destruction was loud and finite and invited retaliation from every allied network. His objective was something more elegant and more total. He wanted leverage, permanent self-sustaining leverage over the most powerful network in the region. And leverage over a man like Seung Hoon required something that couldn't be bought or threatened or removed. It required something chosen. A wife who had a brother inside the Red Dragon Network. A wife who didn't know. Or a wife who would move through Seung Hoon's world and love him and be loved in return, in whatever language that took in a man like Seung Hoon, while her brother fed everything she touched, everything she heard, everything she was adjacent to, directly to the other side. She was not bait for a trap. She was designed to be a permanent door. "Where is David now?" she said. "We located him 2 hours ago. He's in a safe house in the Eastern District. Park Joon-ho's people." "He went to ground when the summit failed." "Yes," she turned from the wall. "What happens to him?" Seung Hoon looked at her, the cut above his eyebrow, the composure that cost him something now visibly in a way it hadn't 38 days ago. "That," he said carefully, "is not a decision I will make without you." She had not expected that, and she let it register fully before she responded. "He's my brother. I know. He spent 3 years engineering the worst day of my life as an intelligence operation. I know, and you're telling me you'll defer to what I want. I'm telling you he's your brother, and that whatever he is, whatever he did, you will have to live with what happens to him. I won't take that choice from you." She looked at him for a long time, the blue light of the monitors, the wall behind her full of threads, the ring on her finger that held light without returning it. "He doesn't get protected," she said finally. "Not by me, not by your network, not by whatever calculation he made when he decided I was a useful variable." She held Seung Hoon's gaze. "But I need him alive. I need him to understand that I know. I need—" She stopped, and found the rest of it somewhere beneath the steadiness. "I need one conversation before anything else happens." "You'll have it," he said, "and Pak Junho is no longer a concern." The way he said it closed a door on the specifics, and she let it close. Some rooms she had decided not to enter. She nodded once. Then she crossed the room and stood in front of him where he sat, and he looked up at her with the unguarded thing fully present in his face now, not attempting concealment, and she understood that this was the version of him that had been there since approximately day 14, and that it was, in its way, the most dangerous thing about him. "You could have told me," she said. "About David, about what you suspected." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" "Because you would have left." The honesty of it was absolute, and no architecture around it, no calculation visible in the delivery. "I might have," she said. "I know. And now?" He looked at her steadily. "Now you know everything I know, and you're still standing in this room." She sat on the edge of the desk, not the chair. The desk, which put her above him, which was not an accident and which he registered without comment. "This is the part," she said, "where a different kind of woman would leave." "Yes." "I'm not leaving. I know. But I need you to understand something." She waited until she was certain she had his full attention, which with Seung Hoon was never uncertain, but she needed the moment regardless. "I am not a variable. I am not a candidate. I am not a mechanism or a door or an asset or a liability. I am the woman who read your file, or walked into your warehouse, found your north room with your own key, and sat in your chair and unraveled 4 years of a network play before you got back from the summit." She held his gaze. "I am what I chose to be in this marriage, and what I choose to be is not managed, not handled, not protected from information I have a right to." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said, "you are not. Say it properly." Something moved at the corner of his mouth, the closest thing to a smile she had seen on him in 42 days. "You are my wife," he said, "and you are—" He searched for the word with the visible effort of a man whose vocabulary for this is genuinely underdeveloped. "Formidable, and I will not manage you." "Good," she said. "Then we can discuss what happens next as equals?" "As equals," he agreed. When she met David 3 days later in a room she had chosen and arranged herself, neutral ground, not the apartment, not a Red Dragon location. A restaurant she knew, closed for the occasion, 2 chairs and a table, and no one else within earshot. He looked like a man who had spent 3 days understanding the precise dimensions of what he had done. Smaller than memory, though she had thought this of Vincent too, and understood now that betrayal did something to the way people occupied space, collapsed them inward, made them take up less room. She sat across from him and didn't speak for a long moment, let him hold the silence with her. "How long," she said, "did you know about Vincent?" "From the beginning," he said. His voice was intact, but the steadiness behind it was gone. "I introduced them. Us Mirabel, you introduced them." Pot needed a placement. someone who could be close to you without raising flags. I suggested, you chose him for me. She looked at her brother, her actual brother, flesh and history and 29 years of a life she had believed she understood, and she felt something that was not quite grief and not quite anger, and existed in the space between them as a third thing with no name. You chose the man I spent 3 years building a life with. You watched me plan a wedding. You walked me to the... She stopped, restarted. You were going to walk me down the aisle, David, to a man you placed there. He had the decency not to explain it, not to build the architecture of justification that she could see him wanting to construct. He sat with it instead. She gave him credit for that. In the cold and limited way she had credit left to give him. I won't tell you what it cost me, he said finally. I know it doesn't matter what it cost me. No, she said, it doesn't. They sat in the quiet restaurant with the afternoon light coming in through the windows at a low angle. Are you going to be safe, he said, with him? She looked at her brother for a long moment, at the face she had known longest of any face in her life. Safer than I was, she said, with the life you built around me. He closed his eyes. She stood, picked up her jacket, looked at him once more. Not with love exactly, not yet, possibly not for a long time, but with the acknowledgement of something real that had become something ruined and would have to be, if it was ever to be anything again, entirely rebuilt. Don't contact me, she said. Not yet. I'll tell you when. She walked out into the afternoon. Seung Hoon's car was at the curb. She got in. He didn't ask her how it went. He looked at her once with the full attention of a man who has decided that seeing someone clearly is more important than managing what he sees. And then he looked forward. She put her hand on the seat between them. After a moment, his closed over it. The car moved through the city. She watched it go past. The ordinary streets, the bakery, the dry cleaner with the handwritten sign, all the same as it had been the day she left a church in a white dress and entered a life she hadn't chosen. She thought about choice, about the difference between a life arranged around you and a life you build with open eyes inside the full knowledge of what it costs. She thought about a wrong number that wasn't entirely wrong, about a contract burned in a fireplace, about a north room and a wall of threads and a key left in a drawer where she would find it. She thought about the ring on her finger. She stopped thinking and simply sat with the city moving past her and his hand over hers and the particular quality of quiet that exists between two people who have told each other the truth and decided to stay anyway. The car moved on. You just finished something that most love stories are afraid to begin. Ruthless romance tales doesn't do safe. It doesn't do clean. And it does the kind of story where love is built in the dark, where the foundation is complicated and the walls are earned, and the person standing beside you at the end is standing there because they know every dangerous thing about you and chose to remain. If this story held you, if Mirabel's steadiness unsettled you, if Seung Hoon's restraint cost you something, if the North Room changed the way you understood everything that came before it, then you already know what we do here. Subscribe. Because there are more stories in this space, and none of them will let you go easily, like this episode. Share it with someone who understands that the most dangerous relationships are the ones where both people are paying attention. And leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. I will find you in those comments and say hello, because how far this story traveled matters to me. But before you go, I need you to sit with this question. David spent 3 years watching his sister fall in love with a man he placed in her life. Seung Hoon came to that church knowing the intelligence wasn't clean and chose her anyway. Mirabel burned the contract knowing the marriage began as a mechanism. Every person in this story made a choice that was also a calculation. So tell me, If love begins as a strategy, does choosing it anyway make it real? Or does the strategy never stop running beneath the surface, quiet, patient, and permanent as a foundation no one can see?